Hello and welcome to the latest in the Leaders with Ambition podcast series. And today I'm absolutely delighted to welcome my guest. Today I've got Ali Alameda Jones, who's the Global CMO of BCLP with me. And it's going to be a fascinating conversation today. It's really interesting when speaking to Ali. She grew up in Brazil and with her amazing mum, who has remained her inspirational role model throughout her life. And I'm sure she'll share some stories around that. Also, Ali will discuss the impact of a period of her time when she was searching for a racial identity connection and how important this was for her and the impact that it had on her and her personal life and also on her career. And this really helped for her to succeed as she became such a resilient and determined person. Wanted at one stage to be a journalist, which was when she was first in the UK, and was advised by a tutor that as English wasn't her first language, that maybe she needed to pivot into marketing. And I think she's done that pivot incredibly well, if you look where she is today. She'll also discuss her transition from managing into leadership and how important that has been with her for ensuring that the emotional intelligence has always remained high, which is something that Ali holds dear because she is a very authentic person. I think that will come through hugely today. She's passionate about EDI, and this is something that, again, has remained throughout her career and something that she really believes in having a truly inclusive environment as part of her workplace. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Ali to bring her career history to life for us. Ali, over to you.
Oh, okay. Oh, I can only hope that this will be as interesting as you were promising. But Nikki, you mentioned I'm originally from Brazil, and I have been living and working in the UK now for 25 years. This is my home. It is my spiritual home. The UK has provided for me generously, both in emotionally, spiritually, financially. My husband is British. My children were born here, so I'm hugely...
You're British then? That's it.
Exactly. I am indeed. So I've been really fortunate with all the opportunities that have been presented to me here. And I think one thing that was really defining for me is when I moved to the UK and I was in sort of my mid-20s, it was really important for me two things, that I would have the career that I felt I would have had I stayed in Brazil.
Right.
I came from a background of a sort of a mom who really worked and really invested in her career and really invested in my education. So I always joke that I had an education that my parents couldn't afford because my mom always said that was her greatest inheritance to me. So I felt a huge, somewhat obligation to make a life for myself here and have career opportunities that would have been as exciting as. So that really framed my drive, because as soon as I arrived in the UK, I felt, rightly or wrongly, that I was disadvantaged because I was different.
And did that then inspire you to really push yourself forward and achieve more then?
Yes, it did. I think I had both a totally misplaced sense of self-confidence, which helped me and hindered me at times. So I think it worked both ways, but also gave me great drive. And by the way, when I say I felt I was disadvantaged, that is my perception. And this is the thing with diversity. It doesn't mean it's real, but it was real to me. Right?
Reality, yes.
It was my reality. So there are... The thing about inclusion and diversity is removing barriers, both real and imaginary, right? And is helping individuals make themselves feel comfortable and feel like they belong in a particular environment and they can flourish. So that, yes, absolutely gave me huge drive to just apply myself and hugely privileged because I've met so many people who not only believed in me, but coached me and more importantly, sponsored me. You know, they were prepared to vouch for me.
I remember you saying to me though that, again, this is, I think, something that your mother instilled in you is this sense of you can achieve, you know, the harder you work, then the more luck you will create for yourself. And I think you mentioned when you were applying for roles, you sent out so many applications because you knew what you wanted to do and how you were going to achieve that. So you made it happen, didn't you?
So yes, there was a lot of drive and there was a lot of application, but sometimes misplaced, right? Because when you were that young, at least for me, I thought that the way to achieve things was through a logic of maximum effort, that therefore I had to break my back in order to get anywhere. And I was compulsively applying for jobs, sometimes with very little targeting in mind. I think I was a prolific job seeker.
And was it just marketing roles, or you didn't care about the industry? Was that part of it, or were you trying to hone in? Because it's a big market, isn't it? If you're looking at marketing roles in any kind of world.
Interestingly, I think with marketing roles in general, I very quickly realized that not being a native speaker was going to be problematic if I wanted to be a journalist and report in English. And somebody, a tutor, was doing a sort of English course in order to try and do a master's here. So just to prove I had the English skills to do so. And he said, your English is very good for somebody who is not a native English speaker, but I don't think you're going to have a career here as a journalist. It was really harsh feedback to get at the time. It was a kind of the shattering of my dreams, but it was very true and it was very important. But he said, why don't you look into marketing, public relations? So I then started applying for jobs in marketing and public relations in general.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that I never landed in consumer marketing because I grew up in Brasilia, which is a very administrative city. And the little experience I had in Brasilia was in press offices of governmental bodies. So there was something around doing something that was more corporate from the beginning that was sort of fairly comfortable. And eventually I got a job at a subsidiary of ABN AMRO, which was an investment banking at the time. If you're as old as me, you will remember it was acquired by RBS back in the day. And that was my very first marketing role. And it started from there, really. It was at that time where I was very much a marketing generalist. I think anybody who starts a career in marketing benefits from that, right? So I did, I worked on the website, I worked on pitches, I worked on brochures because there was still the time we sent brochures. But then there was an opportunity for me to move into a press office role to help cover a maternity leave. And that, in a way, I felt it got me closer to the journalist PR bit thing that I wanted. And it sort of went from there. But that job gave me the confidence, right? But it was not an easy process. I remember at the time, every time, not being a native English speaker I felt I had a real chip on my shoulder about that. Right? It put a lot of, it's not chip on my shoulder, but it put pressure on me, right? So I remember that for my first 3 months of probation, everything I'd write down, I would either send to my partner at the time for him to check, or eventually I made friends with the receptionist, and I self-cautiously would pass on to her for her to pick on any typos.
I love that. Most important people in any firm, the receptionist, as well, as we all know. Yeah,
absolutely. But I think what was good, I think these are just small examples of how you meet lots of people along your career that help you in different ways. Sometimes it's not just your boss or somebody that is more senior to you or a colleague. It's just somebody who's, happy to pick up on your typos before you submit the work.
And that's important. And I know that you, as you say, you started to develop your career there, and you really did feel that marketing was something that you were good at, that you were passionate about, and hence why I think you're probably so good at it. But what was it that made you really feel this is it? This is what I want to do. This is going to be my future and my career now. When did that all click?
I think pretty early on. I think as soon as I sort of started doing the work, I just liked the work. I liked this idea of and by the way, I think I am not a traditional CMO. A lot of CMOs come from a much sort of a very strong BD background, right? And I actually started my career in marketing. And for many years, I was actually a PR manager and was in this process of trying to raise profile and trying to generate headlines. I used to work for a design firm at the time, and design doesn't tend to be a boardroom agenda, right? The design of your offices. So I was really in the process of like, how do I turn that into an important C-suite topic? And I started to then commission what we now call thought leadership, but at the time we were not even, I don't think we even used the term. And in the process of doing that, I started sort of connecting the dots. Okay, if this is interesting enough for the FT to write about, it means it's interesting enough to our clients. And what are the client conversations, the profitable client conversations that we can generate on the back of this content? So I think what was important for me, and it continues to be important, is this curiosity of how things can work together and how you can pull things together and create opportunities for different parts of the business. And I think that was a pretty pivotal moment, because then my career opened up from starting in a very generalist way, a sort of generalist marketer, to then going into PR. It then expanded into marketing and communications and business development. It was really this quest of how do I proactively promote the firm I work for.
I love that. And, as you were saying, starting off as that generalist is a really good way, isn't it, to really understand a business and also understand where your strengths lie, so that you can then start to focus in more as your career is progressing as well.
I think so. And I think anybody who wants a sort of the amazing thing about a career in marketing is there are so many jobs within that enormous pot that we call marketing and business development, right? And moving sideways as well as moving upwards, I think, is what enriches your career. So I say to everybody, try and do lots of different things, even if it's not as a job, but as a project, because the more you understand how things fall together, the more you become an asset to your colleagues and to the business you work for.
Yeah, because it's always about adding value. That's the most important thing, isn't it?
Correct.
Are you adding value all the time? And so you moved on from your role, and you moved to Gensler, didn't you? Which was somewhere that you really enjoyed, and you felt that, again, your career took the next step forward.
Yes, so I started as a marketing generalist. It's an amazing thing, and I recommend to anybody that even if you don't start as a generalist, try and pick up some generalist skills along the way.
Yeah.
What it makes it fascinating and rewarding and interesting about working in marketing and business development is there are so many jobs within this big bucket, right? And the career progression happens not just by moving upwards, but by moving sideways and picking up all these different skills and knowing how to connect them. So I think that is really important.
Yeah, I love that. And you recognised here, didn't you, as you were saying, that looking at people, sponsorship, mentoring, how important that was. And you had, as you mentioned earlier, you had some great sponsors throughout your career, but you also wanted to pay it forward, didn't you, in your own teams? And then this was when you started to really develop from the management style and what you wanted a manager to be and look like, to feeling about what leadership was, and around how you really needed to utilise the emotional intelligence that is very strong in you to be a successful leader.
I think there is a sort of a very crucial moment in everybody's career in terms of this transition from manager to leader, and is the moment that you accept that you don't need to know everybody else's jobs better than they do in order to lead and inspire them. And I think it's a real mind shift, right? I think whilst you're still thinking that you need to be able to do everybody else's job in order to have a voice, then you are managing. The moment you recognize that your role is to enable everybody to have a voice and to actually continuously learn and be challenged by your teams, you start to become a leader. And there is both and I think that's a moment of both confidence, but also humility as well. I think, the best leaders, I think, in my opinion, balance confidence and humility in a really nice way. You've got the confidence to take things on and to propose and to lead and to add vision, but you have the humility to know that you don't really know everything. And actually, if you try and know everything, you won't be doing your leadership job as well.
I think that's a really good way of explaining and describing it as well, actually. And you were wanting to be in the law world. You were being brought back into law, weren't you, at your time at Linklater? So what was the natural career progression there for you?
Yeah. So it was interesting. I think Gensler was an employer I absolutely loved. I loved working in property and design. I always think that the way we are trained really explains our mindset, right? And designers and architects, they are trained to brainstorm and to be creative. And it's almost a bit like, let the engineers worry whether this can be implemented or not.
Yeah.
So it was a little bit like that. It was an opportunity to be so creative, so expansive.
Amazing.
And when I decided to move, there was actually a choice at the time between staying within property and moving to law. But I was quite intrigued about law. I think I had worked for such a long time, as I mentioned before, to try and make something sound and feel like a boardroom issue.
Yeah.
That what really attracted me to working for a law firm was that as a lawyer, you can build profile on the back of anything, pretty much, right? You can everything, even your tube ticket, your train ticket, is a contract between you and the train company. So the scope for what you can comment on and the type of work you do is really broad. So that was hugely appealing at the time. But there was a transition as well, like I mentioned, that if architects are trained to think expansively and not worry about implementation, lawyers are trained to work with precedent and spot flaw. So the challenge becomes, how do you deliver within a law firm something that for the lawyer needs to be really original, but you need to absolutely prove that it's going to work, right? So it is the dilemma of working for law firms, because that's how lawyers are trained.
How did you find that transition then? Because that is, not everybody can actually transition quite smoothly into a law firm, can they? Did you find it relatively easy, or was it just, again, going down to your determined nature that you're going to make this work?
I found it really hard, actually. The first 6 months, I probably, spent crying under my desk. It was just a very different environment, right? And I also had been with my previous company for a long time. So we all, work is an enormous part of our lives. It's like a relationship, right? So there was this part of me that felt I was always sort of mourning. Linklaters were amazing employers to me. I voiced very early that I was struggling with a sense of belonging, and I was actually given a coach who was a partner at Linklaters, and he was wonderful because he really helped me through this idea that I felt just intimidated by being in an environment where, most people were British and had gone to Oxbridge, at least it was how it was at the time. And they were amazing employers to me. They gave me so much opportunity. They, did so much for me, promoted me, coached me. I had a fantastic time there. But having that coaching from that partner was really important, because actually a lot of the barriers were in my head. They really were.
Yeah.
Right. So I think this is why I go back to my point at the beginning, that when you're talking about inclusion and diversity and inclusion, sometimes you're very focused on the policies and on the targets, and sometimes we forget that if you as an individual feel different, you could be putting yourself into quite an isolated corner without necessarily realizing.
Yeah. But amazing that, as you say, at the time, a law firm back then actually wanted to make sure that you didn't feel like that, and that you were given this sense of belonging, and that there was the investment in a coach. And I think that's really forward thinking.
Incredible. I mean, really, really progressive.
Yeah.
I think when I joined was 2013. So, we're talking 10, 11 years ago, was really, really progressive. And I think it's really, yeah, I think a lot has continued to change. I think for the better, actually.
Yeah, which it needs to and needed to. It continues to need to change, doesn't it? We're not there yet by a long shot, are we? And so you studied for your MBA as well around the same time, didn't you? What was the reason behind that? Why did you think you wanted an MBA? A lot of hard work.
It was a lot of hard work, but what I felt is that when you work at a law firm, I guess any firm, right? People can trust you for different things. So, generally partners want to trust marketers to do the basics, don't mess up my pitches, don't mess up my award submissions, don't mess up my press releases, that type of very basic trust. But there is a leap that particularly at the time, that I felt that as a function we need to make, which is to be trusted to develop a strategy, to lead in certain discussions. And I thought at the time that an MBA would help me to understand the running of the business and to give me a voice in that room. And actually did. Again, not because you need an MBA to do that, but it's all around what do you think you need. And at the time, I felt it would help me and would help my self-confidence. And it did, absolutely did. And also I gained a lot of knowledge.
Yeah.
Is it the be-all and end-all? Absolutely not. Yeah. So I'm always very cautious when people ask me, should I do an MBA? And I always go, well, how much does it matter to you? Because at the end of the day, that's
behind it. Yeah,
that self-confidence is the edge of the knife that everything kind of tends to run through in your life.
Yeah, I think that's so important, actually, as you say that, how do you feel all the time, isn't it? That confidence piece. And if that makes you feel more confident to achieve what you need to do, then crack on and do it. But it's interesting that, you're a specialist in your field. And, as you were saying earlier on in your career, you'd done a lot of thought leadership work and started to develop that, which actually was way before most people were doing that in the industry. So you were adding value all the time anyway because of being a specialist in your role. So it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think you have to, if you have a skill, and that is everywhere, we need to remember that we need to create a demand for our skill, right? So, for example, when thought leadership was my bag, I was on a charm offensive to create demand for that skill, which didn't necessarily exist within law firms at the time, right? But that was a really good springboard to other things within marketing, right? So as I moved on in my career, then I started managing digital. I have overseen events teams, content teams, internal and internal comms that eventually came back into my remit, and then expanding to areas of value proposition development, service line development. And I think this is what I talk about, being happy to put your hand up and get involved. I think there are sometimes two types of people in firms, and this is a huge generalization, right? You have two extremes. The people go, this is 1 millimeter outside my sandbox, it's not my job. And the people go, oh my God, it's a mile outside my sandbox, should it be my job, right? I'm sure the balance is in the middle, but if you want to learn, do look for the things outside your sandbox where you can help and where you can contribute.
Push yourself out there, look for opportunities, grab the opportunities that you're really learning. Help. Yeah. And I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier as well around this connection with people all the time and, trying to help people and they're going to help you. And you don't know if it's going to be someone you bump into in the office, a receptionist, the partner who's going to be able to pay something forward as well.
And I think this is really important. Sometimes in a partnership environment, we are overly concerned about service to the partners. And we should be. They are the owners of the business, that pays our salaries. But we can't forget service to each other, right? How do we serve each other? And I think that is hugely important, hugely important.
I think that's a really good point. And as you say, it gets missed so many times, doesn't it? And that's how you build networks and relationships are at the key of what we do in professional services firms as well, aren't they?
Correct. Absolutely.
That's what it's all about. So you did your successful career and then you found that you wanted to set up your own consulting firm.
Everybody who does an MBA eventually wants to set up their own business. It is a fever that I think most people who do an MBA get. But I
You need
did
to be
that.
warning on MBAs now then.
Exactly, right. So, but it was a really good experience, actually. I think at the time it was partially driven by I wanted to experiment with a different lifestyle. My children were quite little, and I had two boys, had a close age gap, only a 21-month age gap.
Yeah, gosh,
and I had always been a working mom, right? I think I had a 6-month maternity leave with my first son. With my second son, I had an 8-month mat leave. And I wanted to experiment with, can I work flexibly, a bit more flexibly, so I can be around for the school pickups and I can be around for the drop-offs. And it didn't last for that long, but it was a very sweet time. And I found out two things. I found out that I missed the sense of belonging. And part of it, I wonder if it is not, obviously, all my original family, as in mother, brother, are back in Brazil. And so I think work has given me an enormous sense of belonging. Every firm I have worked at has been really important in giving me a sense of belonging. And I have made amazing friendships through work. I always joke with people, I have this habit of turning colleagues into long life friends. So I felt there was a lack of sense of belonging, and consulting and being 2 steps removed from the business. I felt that I wasn't getting that satisfaction of moving things, seeing the needle move from A to B. And I found it really lonely, actually. And I think it's a personality thing. I'm one of these people that talks to think. So not having that
people,
I found it a bit lonely, actually. So I think it didn't last, but I think I consulted for about 10 months or something like that. And people were lovely, and people gave me work. And again, when I say that I've been fortunate in this country has provided abundantly for me, this is what I mean, right? I said, I'd like to go freelance, and then it's like, would you like to do this right? So this you still have to prove yourself, and you still have to network, but it wasn't unsurmountable at the time. That I felt that kind of was better suited to a different environment.
But I love that you tried it as well, because so many people, as you say, get these ideas and don't want to try something different or come off the career ladder because they feel it may not be the right move for them longer term. And you tried it didn't work, so you went back.
Correct. I think, do you know what? There are decisions you make in your career that you think, oh my God, was I reckless? I was at a great firm. But then I always think that sometimes we focus so much, is it a right decision, a wrong decision? And the reality is you make a decision and life accommodates around you, right? You are the opportunity. It's not, the environment, yes, it facilitates it, but you are the opportunity. So that goes with you wherever you go.
Yeah. And you also had such a great network. And as you say, so then you decided to go back into a law firm. And I know you went into a crisis management situation, didn't you, at KWN? And again, you really enjoyed that because it was so different to what you'd experienced previously.
It was incredible. Yeah, I got to experience. It was the first time that I was overseeing lots of different aspects of marketing and communication. So it gave me this real ability to think of how I connect the dots. The firm was going through a kind of post-merger crisis, which led in the end to the European side of KWN to be sort of sold off to a sort of a demerger, if you like. But I learned so much, and I made so many connections as well, and both within my own team, but also within the partnership. So it was like it's a really intensive course, both in business management and how, dealing with business issues, but also crisis management, brand building, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It was incredible. It was incredible. Yeah.
Hard work, I imagine, as well, though.
Really hard work, but, it was, there's a really, I think, career-defining experiences.
And so then you moved to Baker McKenzie. And that, again, was a really amazing opportunity for you. And you had a great career there, didn't you?
Oh, I loved Baker McKenzie. I joined. It's a truly global firm, so it really suited my background.
Skill set.
The skill set, the opportunity to work across cultures was super important, and there was plenty of opportunities to do that. But also, again, I joined Baker McKenzie as head of marketing and communications for the UK, and I think in this just over 6 years as I was with the firm, I was then promoted to associate director of content and marketing strategy globally. Then I was promoted to director of marketing, and eventually to director of marketing and stakeholder engagement. So I had kind of
different jobs there.
different jobs within that organization. There was a lot of change management. I loved it. It was incredible. It was an incredible experience.
And again, your network really started to develop there again. I know you'd already had such a strong network, and you'd, as you mentioned earlier, you kept these connections throughout. But this was all starting to pay forward, wasn't it, through your time at Baker McKenzie as well? And it was even stronger, the connection and contacts that you had with people.
I think it really cemented, if I sort of look back, I think it really cemented this transition from a manager approach to a leader approach. I think that had started to happen at KWM, but at Baker McKenzie, just the scale of the organization, it really forces you to go, I really don't know everything. How can I work and best support the people who do know this, and how I can connect the dots. So I remember thinking a lot at the time of the way I add value has changed, right? And it's not just about the work product, but it is about the connections. And by the way, I love the work product, and I think I'm one of these people that I love the work, and that is a good thing, because I'm not just helicopter that doesn't do anything, doesn't draft anything. But it is also a hindrance to teams. So I had to start to learn to be more clearer. And I'm still learning that in terms of what is it that I'm going to do personally, and what is it that I want, that other people need to do. But this is I think, providing you approach these with honesty, because all of us have challenges as leaders, and all of us have development areas. And I think it's really important to signal that, so that people around you can support you too.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and that's so important in a leadership role, is that trust factor, isn't it? And having not just trust within your firm, but also, I would imagine, with your peer group and other CMOs, so you've got that psychological safety as well. That's essential, isn't it?
And that is one thing I love about law firms, right? Having spent the first 6 months crying under my desk when I joined law firm, as I joked earlier, I have been working with law firms now since 2011. You get to know so many people, and even if you don't know them personally, you know of them.
Yeah.
But now I sort of joke that I go to law firm events just to see my mates. The content is good, but it's important. But really, I'm just going to see my mates. There is a lot of camaraderie within the industry, and that is a really important thing. I think that should apply for any industry, but for law in particular. When I go back to the point I made earlier, to service to each other, I firmly believe that part of my career progression wasn't necessarily because of technical excellence. I think there could be other people out there. I'm sure, in fact, that there were other people out there who were more technically brilliant than I was. But I think at times I was picked for certain roles or put forward for certain roles because people were not adverse to working with or for me.
Yeah.
And that is hugely important, because people forget that the people you end up managing one day might be your peers, right? As we grow up in organizations. And I think it's really that authenticity and the service to each other. We don't get it right all the time at all, but it's hugely important.
And bringing your best self to work all the time, because that's something that you have done, which again encourages people to do the same. And people want to work with good people, don't they?
I think so, and I hope I do bring myself to work. I think, and it goes back to the kind of inclusion and diversity point. I think we need to have an environment that is provided to us to be ourselves, but also we need to have the courage to be that. Nobody can do it for you, right? A firm can create the right conditions, can support, can sponsor you, but you also have to take responsibility for how you want to turn up.
Yeah. Career. You've got to own your career as well, haven't you?
You've got to own your career.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I think it's interesting because sometimes you do see, people just expecting these promotions because they've been there for a certain amount of time. But to your point earlier, what are you bringing to work every day? Are you pushing yourself out there? Are you taking opportunities, or are you putting yourself in your box and saying, well, this is my job? And you've always got to think about, what else can I do? How can I add value? How can I develop personally and improve? So important.
Right. I go back again, it's a sort of service to each other, right?
Yeah. It's a contract, isn't it, to each other? And so you had a really great time at Baker McKenzie, and I know you felt that, as you said, you hit your stride. It was a really good cultural fit for you, and you then made a decision to move because you were headhunted.
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, there was a really good opportunity to move. I had felt that there was a piece of brand work that I really wanted to have fully implemented at KWM and never had the chance. It just felt like I really agonized because I loved Baker's, right? But it was a really amazing opportunity, and I don't regret it. It's been, again, fantastic.
Did you have any imposter syndrome on the way? Were you thinking, is this going to? It was a big role that you stepped into as well, wasn't it? Did you know that you'd be able to do it?
I still don't. I think we always struggle with imposter syndrome from time to time, right? So when I moved to BCLP, and by the way, when you move and you are not desperately unhappy in a place, right? When you move because of opportunity, not because of
very different, isn't it?
There are two impulses to move from a firm. One is lack of opportunity, and one is more opportunity somewhere else, or different opportunity. And the latter was my case. So I remember at the time talking to someone at BCLP and say, I'm concerned. I feel I have a lot of credibility at the firm I'm in right now. Am I cashing in all my chips at the same time? And this person said to me, but the credibility comes with you, right? You bring it with you. The credibility is not a gift that people give you, right? It is something that you earn. And that was really important. And I say that to anybody that is potentially considering a career move. But no, I started at BCLP in a marketing and communications role, and there was then the opportunity to expand to the CMO role. I had done elements of the business development side previously, but not in a while. So there was a real recognition of this is what I think I can bring to the role, but also a real excitement from my part as well, because I always want to be doing something that is new and interesting and different, right? We can't just be I can only do what I have done before, otherwise, right? How do we grow? And it's been fantastic. I've been really supported. I made lots of connections within firm, and my best way to dealing with imposter syndrome, it has become for me now accepting my vulnerability.
Okay.
And I think it's the best way to disarm the imposter. You feel like an imposter because you feel you should know everything. Yeah. So the moment that you put your hand up and say, can you help me with this? Or I really don't know that, or I'm struggling with this, you disarm the imposter, because you just go, you're only an imposter if you think you need to know everything.
Yeah, if you allow it to happen. And I love that advice, actually. It's such a really good way of thinking about it. And, the vulnerability piece is essential as a leader as well, isn't it?
I think it's really powerful. Vulnerability can be a superpower if you use it with honesty and integrity and you do it right.
Yeah, such a good point. So I know that obviously we talked throughout the conversation today about your passion for this inclusivity and the sense of belonging. How do you ensure that keeps happening, and that people feel like that work in your firm? What's the secret sauce in the firm?
I think in the firm, I'm not sure there is a secret sauce, by the way. I think there is intention and follow through.
Right.
I think I work for a firm, and by the way, all the firms I've mentioned in this podcast are all firms that are deeply committed to DEI. And I work as a firm that is deeply committed to DEI and has had follow through. So I walk into the boardroom and there are other people of color. I, work with many female leaders, and I look at the people coming through the organization, and I see diversity being celebrated in all its forms, right? Be it gender, ethnicity, neurodiversity, so on and so forth. So that it is this combination of intention and follow through. But I also go back to now there are two dangerous things that we could fall into when it comes to DEI. One is to confuse the talk with progress. The fact that we're talking lots about DEI doesn't mean that the entire world has changed.
It's happening.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? It is happening, but it hasn't, it's not like the problem solved.
Yeah.
But also, the other part of it is that we become way too reliant on policy and process and procedure, because that only does one thing. It doesn't replace that tap on the shoulder, both from you to others, to go, is everything all right? Are you feeling okay? But also, it also doesn't take away the responsibility from the individual to go, I'm not feeling included, and how can we do this better? And do it in a spirit of collaboration. I don't think, unless something is wrong, it's not the finger pointing is not the most constructive way to bring a diversity and inclusive environment. I believe a lot of firms genuinely want to create. I'm an optimist. A lot of people out there will disagree, but I think there is a lot of diversity, a lot of awareness of inclusion and diversity. Sometimes people don't know that they are not being inclusive. Sometimes the environment is not there. So I think we have both an obligation to challenge constructively.
Yeah.
And the constructively is really important, because we risk making DEI into a really divisive tool.
I think that's so true. And as you say, calling people out is really important, that challenge. And then education as well around that, if people do need it, if they don't understand what they've said or what environment. But I do agree that now firms are so it's an intrinsic way of thinking, isn't it? Now I think with a lot of firms it has to change from what it was, and the change needs to keep happening. Things need to keep moving all the time, don't they, and pivoting and going in a different direction.
Absolutely. And I think it is incumbent in all of us to make it happen. We all
got responsibility.
All responsible for the change.
I completely agree. And what about, what do you think are the biggest challenges at the moment for CMOs in law firms then? Because there's a lot of things happening, isn't there? And a lot of change seems to be happening as well.
I think the biggest challenge for law firms in general is the race to the top, right? Is the PEP race, the profit per equity partner race. And you would have seen the amount of mobility within the market, the lateral hiring, it has become a much more aggressive market. Business development has become much more sophisticated, much more intentional. And I think that has given CMOs a much greater voice. Right. And with that comes a responsibility. I think to support firms in that race to the top, I think one of the key challenges is people. How do we attract, develop, and retain the best people? You need a degree of tenure to make an impact, right? And I think any CMO, particularly if someone is relatively new in role like I am, will be thinking about team and how do I build the best team, right? I think the second thing is technology. Law firms have acquired all sorts of bits of technology and data, and we know how crucial data is for decision making and for client intelligence. Our brand is to be client intelligent at PCLP. And that comes from data insights and analytics. The problem we have is a very, very fragmented marketing technology stack that doesn't talk to each other. And that is a big piece of work that needs to start to come together for law firms. because that will influence everything, how we pitch, how we promote the brand, how we understand the client, how we capture and manage revenue and profitability and everything. So I think there's quite a lot that is huge, the technology piece, right? And it's very, very fragmented. And thirdly, I think that we are still thinking very functionally. So I use this analogy a lot. As a CMO, I'm thinking the tendency anyway is to think of the things that live within my function. And we are trying to integrate functionally, right? We're trying to make marketing talk to comms a bit more and comms talk to BD a bit more. However, the next challenge, and the challenge many firms have already embarked, is how do you grow cross-functionally, right? Because when you're trying to work functionally, you have a shopping mall approach. If a partner needs conflict clearing, they go to the basement. If they need pricing, they go to the first floor. If they need a pitch, they go to the second floor. And what we need to do is collaborate cross-functionally so that here's everything you need to grow a client. It's your pitching, it's your conflict clearance, it's your, the account management. All these things start to work and collaborate much more closely together. I think there is a lot of effort and knowledge leakage between these gaps that fall between functions. The gaps between functions are, I think, a real problem to efficiency and our ability to grow the business.
And that's a big step change, isn't it, within a law firm to try and change that as well. So again, it's one of those things that probably will have to be lots of smaller changes rather than one big step change. Would that be fair to say?
I think so, and I think that will happen through collaboration. I don't think that will be a massive structural change, right? Somebody could be very brave and completely restructure all business services departments within law firms. Would be a brave move and would be an interesting one. But the main thing with that is collaboration.
Yeah.
And it goes back to the service to each other. We don't serve just the partners. How do we support each other? How do we help each other?
Which is actually a really great way, again, of bringing it all back together, isn't it? Of how do you work in a collaborative manner where you service each other and it's about the greater good, isn't it? All the time. Yeah,
absolutely.
So what words of wisdom would you share for either Ali growing up in Brazil, not even thinking then that she was going to be a global CMO one day, she was going to be a journalist?
Be intentional. In what you want. You don't need to kill yourself to achieve something. Like work hard, but work with intention.
Yeah, work smartly. Yeah.
Work smartly, right? So work smart, right? To achieve what you want, but work with determination. But also remember, so work smart. Words to my young self. Work smart. You don't need to kill yourself to achieve something. Work with determination. Some things take time to happen, right? I see a lot of young people who are very, very bright and want to climb up really quickly and absolutely have the potential to do so, but nothing replaces the lived experience.
Yeah.
Right? So sometimes you know this, but you just need to deliver it and gain that experience. And don't forget your ecosystem, right? Every person, every stakeholder you work with is as important. They will all be a part of your career experience. So I cited earlier the receptionist that proofread my work.
Yeah.
And I can talk about the COO who, supported my career path and promotions, and the CMO who, truly sponsored me, and the colleagues that really believed in me. So don't forget the service to each other.
Love that. Well, I have to say, Ali, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today, and I love your thought around the superpower of vulnerability in leadership. I think that's really resonated with me, actually. It's something that I'll be giving some thought to as well over the next few days. But thank you so much for your time today.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me, Nikki.